Good morning, I'm Christine Daniel Marie Fosket, and I will tell you about reinforcement. Let's begin by answering what reinforcement is. Reinforcement is any stimulus that maintains or increases the behavior. A stimulus takes on the value of a reinforcer only if it has been demonstrated that the behavior it followed was maintained at the current rate, duration, or intensity, or increased from the current rate, duration, or intensity. If the rate, duration, or intensity of the behavior is not maintained or increased after a stimulus, then that stimulus cannot be considered a reinforcer. So, we need to see the improvement or changes in the child's behavior before we can say that our reinforcement is successful, or we can really call the stimulus we use a reinforcer. Here are some examples of reinforcers. Verbal statements, praising the child verbally, like saying, I'm proud of you, great job, giving them food or drinks, giving them objects that they like, and letting them do the activities they want. Social reinforcers like high fives and so on. Teachers should not limit their understanding of reinforcers to giving candy. In fact, young children will quickly become satiated when food, especially candy, is used as a reinforcer. Satiation refers to a condition in which a current reinforcer loses its reinforcement value. That is, the reinforcer is no longer maintaining the target behavior. For example, when food is used as a reinforcer, a child may become too full to want additional reinforcers like objects or activity reinforcers. That's why it is encouraged to consider other type of reinforcers before edibles. There are two types of reinforcement, the positive and the negative reinforcement. Both positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement increase behavior. So, positive is adding desirable stimulus to increase a behavior. Meanwhile, in negative reinforcement is the removal of undesirable stimulus to increase a behavior. So, positive is adding and negative is removing. Talk about positive reinforcement. Positive reinforcement is the contingent provision of a stimulus, like treat, object, or an activity, following a target behavior, which results in an increase or maintenance of the frequency, duration, or intensity of the behavior. You provide a stimulus to increase or maintain the child's behavior. For example, a child receives money or and praises for cleaning her room. So the money and praises are the reinforcers, and we are trying to increase or maintain the behavior of cleaning her room. Actually, we are constantly and consistently rewarded in our lives. Our paychecks are rewards. Being praised for doing a good job in our work or for passing a driver's test is also a reward. In order for positive reinforcement to be successful, we need to know what kind of reinforcers we are going to give to the child. So, how do we know what reinforcer will be effective to the child? Observing the child and asking what they want can be used as a way to know their interests. Some students appreciate simple reinforcers like praises. Many researchers have used the simple provision of positive reinforcement in the form of verbal praise to help teachers increase academic performance and decrease the frequency of disruptive class behavior. Positive reinforcement as a learning tool is extremely effective. It has been found that one of the most effective ways to increase achievement in school districts with below average reading scores was to pay the children to read. Specifically, second grade students in Dallas were paid $2 each time they read a book and pass a short quiz about the book. The result was significant increase in reading comprehension. So, for this example, they used money as a reinforcer and they wanted to increase the students' reading comprehension. Now, let's talk about negative reinforcement. Negative reinforcement is the contingent removal of a stimulus following a target behavior, which result in an increase or maintenance of the frequency, duration, or intensity of the target behavior. Usually, the removed stimulus is an aversive or unpleasant stimulus. An example of negative reinforcement is a teenager dislikes when her parent is constantly reminding her about cleaning her bedroom or how messy her bedroom is. If the parent removes or decreases the reminders, it is more likely the teen may clean her room to avoid hearing the reminders. So, the undesirable stimulus is constantly reminding the teen to clean her bedroom, which the parents need to stop or remove in order for the child to exhibit or increase the target behavior, which is cleaning her room. We have to remember that negative reinforcement is not punishment, because the effect of negative reinforcement is an increase in the target behavior, not a decrease, which will be effect of a punishing stimulus. Here's a simple table that might help us understand the difference between reinforcement and punishment. Reinforcement is about increasing a behavior, and punishment is about decreasing a behavior. Positive reinforcement is adding something to increase a behavior. Meanwhile, positive punishment is adding something to decrease a behavior. Negative reinforcement is removing of something to increase a behavior, and negative punishment is removing something to decrease a behavior. There are two variations of negative reinforcement. The first one is the student performs the target behavior to escape an ongoing aversive stimulus. For example, when a teacher tells a student he must remain in a timeout corner until he no longer exhibits tantrum behavior, the teacher is using negative reinforcement. The purpose here is to teach the student to perform a target behavior, a non tantrum behavior, in order to have the aversive stimulus remaining in the timeout corner removed. The second one is the student performs the target behavior in order to avoid a potential or likely aversive stimulus. For example, when a student performs a target behavior, studying a history lesson, in order to avoid a threatened aversive stimulus, receiving a failing grade, then the target behavior is maintained by negative reinforcement. So the first variation is about escaping the ongoing undesirable stimulus. Meanwhile, in the second variation, there's no undesirable behavior yet, but the child is avoiding it already. There are disadvantages of negative reinforcement, such as students just focus their attention on avoiding the aversive event, and students attempt to act appropriately in order to avoid an undesirable stimulus. Escape and avoidance behavior is the result. For example, consider the differences between two classrooms. In classroom A, these students behave appropriately because their teacher recognizes their good behavior and the students enjoy his or her attention, which is the positive reinforcement. The students in classroom A are likely to enjoy school and have a healthy attitude about learning. In contrast, the students in classroom B behave appropriately only to avoid their teacher's aversive behavior, which is negative reinforcement. The students in classroom B probably do not like going to school and are not motivated, except by fear and anxiety to do well. Some of the students may try to avoid or escape this situation by skipping school or dropping out of school altogether. These side effects represent the primary reasons why negative reinforcement is not recommended as preferred intervention. Reinforcers may be primary or secondary. Both primary and secondary reinforcement increase or maintain target behaviors. Primary reinforcers are stimuli that are naturally reinforcing to individuals, like food and liquids. In other words, they are unlearned or unconditioned. Primary reinforcer is a stimulus that is biologically important to an organism, such as food, water, sleep, shelter. For example, when a baby is hungry, she cries. Her caretaker then feeds her to satisfy her hunger. This response is a survival reflex that doesn't require learning. In this case, hunger is the primary reinforcer that reinforces the crying. Next is secondary reinforcers. Secondary reinforcers are stimuli that are not naturally reinforcing. Their value to the individual has been learned or conditioned through an association or a pairing with primary reinforcers. For example, when a preschool teacher pairs giving verbal praise, a potential secondary reinforcer, with delivering a glass of juice, a primary reinforcer, to a young child, the verbal praise takes on some of the reinforcement value associated with a glass of juice. The purpose here is to fade out or decrease the use of juice as a reinforcer and fade in or increase the value of verbal praise. If successful, verbal praise will become a secondary reinforcer capable of maintaining or increasing the target behavior. So, what is the difference between primary and secondary reinforcers? While a primary reinforcer is innate, a secondary reinforcer is a stimulus that becomes reinforcing after being paired with a primary reinforcer, such as praise, treats, or money. Responding to the secondary reinforcer is a learned behavior, not a born reflex. Now, let's talk about socially valid reinforcers. A reinforcer is considered socially valid when its provision is congruent with the norms of the student's social setting. The variables that determine what is socially valid include culture, setting, age of the student, the specific situation, and the relationship between the teacher and the student. For example, patting a child on the buttocks may be socially acceptable form of reinforcement among football players on the playfield field. So that's the setting, the playfield field. In a different setting, a classroom, this same form of reinforcement is not socially acceptable. So we also have to be careful with the reinforcers that we give to our students. Next is extrinsic versus intrinsic reinforcement. Extrinsic rewards are observable, like giving a child extra time on the classroom computer following the completing of 30 minutes of on-test reading. Meanwhile, intrinsic rewards are internal motivators, like a child reads a book because the activity itself is enjoyable. An extrinsic or external reinforcement is not necessary for the child to complete the task. So here are some examples of extrinsic and intrinsic reinforcers. So for extrinsic reinforcers, we have going to work because you want to earn money, or studying because you want to get a good grade, helping others because you hope for praise, and so on. And for intrinsic reinforcers, we have playing sports because you enjoy how they make you feel, studying because you are curious about the topics, or going to the playground with your children because it makes you happy, and so on. Identifying high preference reinforcers. High preference activities like computer games, free time, recess frequently serve as excellent secondary reinforcers. So PREMAC promotes the idea of using high preference activities high, uh, as reinforcement for the completion of low preference activities. So Case demonstrated the PREMAC principle when he reinforced fourth and fifth graders with increasing amount of time on the classroom computers as they completed increasingly higher levels of activity tasks. Research has demonstrated that high preference items and activities serves as the most effective reinforcers in the behavior management programs, even if the activity is socially restricted. And researchers have found several ways to identify high preference reinforcers. Using the most functional approach, teachers can simply observe and record what students do during both instructional and free time activities to see what they like, what toys they play with most, etc. Just like what I mentioned earlier, it is helpful for us to know what kind of reinforcers we're going to give to the students so we can use different ways to know their interests. Here are some suggestions for reinforcers. For tangible, we can use stars, toys, food, and more. For social, we can do verbal praising, first in line, and many more. For activities, they can feed a pet, use computer, read a story, and more. So here are the reinforcers you can use. And that's all. Thank you for listening.